First of all, good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending where you are, and welcome to this webinar, Leave No One Behind, that is dealing with statistics for SDGs. We are glad to see so many people participating. About 140 people had registered yesterday. So that is a sign that the topic is of great interest. And although at the moment there is a lot of immediate attention on the virus, then in fact that does not mean that SDGs are not relevant. I think in a way SDGs are more relevant than ever. Because when all this emergency will calm down, and at some point it will, although it might be not so easy to believe now, then we may find ourselves to be on SDGs 2 steps back in many areas, but maybe we are in some areas also actually 2 steps forward. And the big question will be, where are we now? And statisticians are one of these people who are expected to provide answers to those questions. So we have to be ready for that. This is the first webinar in the series, replacing the expert meeting on statistics for SDGs that we plan to have in Budapest, and that actually should have been taking place right now. But unfortunately, Budapest has to wait, and we are hoping that maybe we can meet there next year. Those meetings are organized by the UNEC Steering Group on Statistics for SDGs, and different people from the steering group will then moderate the webinar. Today's webinar is moderated by Lineke Huxma from Netherlands and Mary Smith from Ireland. Before giving the floor to the moderators, I would like everyone to remind of a few housekeeping items. So first of all, we will record the webinar, and this recording will be made available on the web afterwards. Then we are asking all participants to mute their microphones and also to disable video when they are not speaking. Please provide your questions and comments via chat. You can include also comments, additional information, and links in the chat. We will also save these and make them available, and we saw with previous webinars that actually a lot of very useful information came through this channel. All papers and presentations are on the web, including some background papers which may not even be presented during the webinar. So with this, I wish to everyone a very interesting and inspiring webinar. We keep fingers crossed that there will be no technical glitches, and thank you for the attention, and I give the floor over to you, Lineke and Mary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina. I shall start off with by introducing the first 2 presentations, and after the second presentation, Mary will take over. I'm just wondering, can you all hear me? It's a stupid question, I know, but and then Mary will take over. It's very good to see we have 77 people online. It's very good to see a lot of familiar names, and I just saw a few familiar faces as well on the webcams before you shut them down. As Tina said, we were going to meet each other face to face in Budapest, and it's a pity we're not there, and I would love to meet you all face to face, but maybe in the future we can do that. So everybody shut down their webcams, and everybody shut down their microphones, apart from Joanne Evans from the UK, who's going to start off with the first presentation about the Inclusive Data Charter. So Jo, would you like to share your screen with us?
Hi, how are you? I'm just going to share my screen now. Let me know if you can see this? Yes?
Yes. You have to sort of make it full screen in some way.
Oh, right. Yes. Hold on. It is that no?
Is it because it's in presentation mode? It may be because of the UNECE settings. I'm not sure.
No, I did this yesterday and I managed to get it right. Right. Just a minute. I'll I'm sorry, everyone.
You can. There was a button swap the present and slideshow. Swap view and slideshow.
Grayed out.
Then try this duplicate slideshow.
That's grayed out too.
But I think we can see like that. So let's
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm sorry for not having this right, even though we did run a test yesterday and I worked it out then. So thank you for having me here to speak about the Inclusive Data Charter, which is an interactive, an initiative rather, of the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. As we all know, we cannot achieve progress towards the SDGs without knowing who the most vulnerable in our society are, and that's where we're supposed to focus our efforts. Sadly, counter to this goal, the truth is that too often the poorest, the most vulnerable people are invisible in data. And this matters because, quite simply, schools, hospitals and roads aren't built for people that we don't know exist. Now, the Inclusive Data Charter is working to advance data globally. We bring together different organizations to help them develop and publicly share their priorities and their commitments to improve data disaggregation. So who exactly is with us? Well, we call them our champions when they come on board, and they currently include statistical offices, government ministries, and non-government actors. Now, I did have a lovely screen with logos and flags, but it was too big to share. These are, so you can see, it's in the statistical offices. We've got the UK, Colombia, Ghana, Philippines, Zanzibar, and there are more people coming on board all the time. So some brief background on how it started and how it runs. Well, it was designed in a collaborative approach, and at the high level, it's managed collaboratively too by the Department for International Development here in the UK, by Site Savers, and by the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. At the working level, we have an outreach manager, a project manager, and 2 technical advisors who are based in my team at the Office for National Statistics. So that's how I'm connected to this. So what does it do? That's how it runs, but what does it do? Well, it builds awareness by advocating for organizations to prioritize inclusive data as part of their commitment to SDGs. It also makes these organizations accountable by encouraging them to make a public commitment to prioritizing inclusive data. And the next 4 bullets is where the Office for National Statistics is involved. So we help the champions develop, share and implement their action plans, and those will include their priorities, their activities and their timelines. We help them to accelerate impact, to foster collaboration and amplify learning. What we do is we link up champions to work on projects where they've got similar priorities. We share best practice. We also share our mistakes so that we can learn from each other. And we provide or broker technical support wherever we can. Now, if you were to come on board as champions, and I hope some of you do, there are 3 components. And now these are things that you are doing already. It's just nice that we can do them together. So the first thing you would need to do is commit to the inclusive data principles. And these are that all populations must be included in the data. All data should, wherever possible, be disaggregated in order to accurately describe all populations. Data should be drawn from all available sources. Those responsible for the collection of data and the production of statistics must be accountable. And finally, human and technical capacity to collect, analyze, and use disaggregated data must be improved, including through adequate and sustainable financing. Now, once you've committed to these principles, you develop and share your action plan, and our technical advisors help you to do this. We've got templates, we've got experience from working with other countries to do theirs, so it's quite pain-free. And then we have the ongoing process of implementation, learning, and collaboration. So is it worth joining? I can hear you asking. What does it achieve? Well, here's some examples of where the IDC has had an impact in real life. So in Colombia, they are developing capacity on data disaggregation within their statistical office, but then they're also providing advice across government as a whole. Then there's the UN Population Fund. They did some work on population estimates that you can see here that had direct applications for their health ministry. And then beyond government, we see that Sightsavers have systematically integrated data collection in all their programmatic work. Now, if that hasn't convinced you to join us, here are some more reasons. I'm not going to read this slide. They're all very good reasons to join us. But what I feel is that the Inclusive Data Charter is really in the spirit of the goals. We're looking constantly for ways to support each other in our joint commitment to increasing inclusive and disaggregated data to help shine a light on those most vulnerable in our society, those who are at most at risk of being left behind. Now, I know that that is something that all of us are doing in our organisations. It's just much better to do it together. Thank you for listening. Please do reach out. The slides will be available with all of our contact details if you are interested in finding out more. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jo. It's very interesting to see how an international approach can be taken, and obviously working towards the strengthening of what we're already doing just by doing it together, as you already said. Yeah. Just a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions about the presentations, please post them in the chat. I haven't seen any coming through yet, but we did receive a few questions beforehand. And one thing that may pertain to Jo's presentation is a question from Carolina Vesta Santos from Statistics Portugal, who I saw was online. And that's about the political dimension of working together internationally. Obviously, as a statistical office in an ideal situation, you are you're independent. You're not you don't have political preferences. But I see, and you told us that the IDC works with government ministries as well. And how do you sort of depoliticize it, if you like? How do you make sure that political opinions are not having too much influence? And Carolina's question was actually, do efforts to collect and disseminate more disaggregated data face potential legal challenges? Because some laws may prevent the collection of data on ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation. And if so, and this is probably the case, I think, are extra layers of security or anonymization put in place to prevent a possible misuse of this kind of data? So could you tell us anything about that, Jo?
I'll try. I'm not so sure about the legal challenges. Obviously, we would, when we develop the action plan, we're doing that with the statistical organisation or with the champion. And so we do have to work within the constraints of their legal framework. But we just encourage, we're all at different levels. And it may be that, yes, there are some things that it's not possible for them to collect data on, but we have to do the best with what we do have. And how we depoliticize it so as us as a statistical office is we are separated from the outreach workers and the project manager. They are not part of the Office for National Statistics. So they deal with bringing countries on board and any issues that may arise. What we're doing, for example, one of our champions is the Ministry of Labour in Kenya. And what we're doing there is working to build relationships between them and their National Statistical Office to help them identify the data. And they're particularly interested in disability data. So we're working with other organisations to help understand how they can use the Washington Group questions on disability to help them improve their data. So there's always that objective statistical angle that you can take, and that way of supporting them to build those relationships with their independent statistical office to get the best disaggregated data they can.
Okay, thanks very much. I hope that answers Carolina's question. Another question that came through before the meeting was from Marina Gandolfo from Italy. And it was a more general question for all the webinars which we're putting online these next few days. What kind of effects would the emergency situation of COVID-19 have on, well, she was talking about production and dissemination of the SDGs, but I wondered if the IDC, if it's going to have an effect, or maybe if the IDC could take a role in collecting and seeing what the effects of COVID-19 are going to be in the future. Are there any ideas about that yet, or is it still too early?
Yes. Joanne, maybe you can put on your video, because then we see you when you are speaking, and it will be nice to see you.
You sure? How's that?
Yeah.
Can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you. We can see
right.
you.
COVID and IDC. Well, we're actually in discussions with the global, so the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data has got several different initiatives within it, and we're making sure that we're talking with them to see where we can support people. At the moment, our technical advisors are carrying on sort of with business as usual, because it's important that we maintain as much as we can the momentum of countries who are developing their action plans. But we're reaching out to our international team, and we're trying to compile information about the approaches people are taking and guidelines that have been put out there on how to cope with the data. I know Marina was particularly looking at the data collection. So we've got advice from other countries, other statistical offices, and we're working to try and share that with our champions. So maybe if they're a bit further behind in the process, if they can get some tips and just about learning from each other's of different approaches.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay.
I can't see any more questions coming through online. Carolina says thank you for the answer. It was very useful, so that's nice.
Oh, that's good.
In that case, I think we'll thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And we'll go on to Sarah. Are you with us, Sarah?
Yes, I'm here.
And Sarah is going to tell us about how Statistics Sweden decided to focus their statistical review this year on the actual subject of leaving no one behind, which was, I thought, quite unusual. But she's going to tell us some more about it. So, Sarah, if you'd like to share your screen with us.
Yes, I will try to do that. There. Can you now see my screen, my presentation?
You're good to
go. Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see so many here. My name is Sarah Frankel. I work at Statistics Sweden, where I run the government assignment that we have on coordinating the development, production, and the availability of the statistical follow-up of the implementation of the 2030 agenda in Sweden. And within the framework of this assignment, we are tasked to produce and publish annual statistical reviews in 2019, 2020, and 2021, and then make a proposal for how the statistical follow-up could be done after that and through to 2030. And when we did the annual review in 2019, we concluded that one of the biggest challenges for Sweden in relation to the agenda was the differences in outcomes in things like health, democratic participation, vulnerability to violence, and many other things in different population groups. So it was felt that we needed to dive deeper into this and develop the national follow-up to better cover the principle of leaving no one behind in future reviews. We also felt that a regular review of the goals and targets in 2020 would not give us very much in terms of the development from the 2019 review. So we decided to devote the 2020 national review to investigating inequalities and the situation for groups and individuals at risk of being left behind. So I should start by saying that this work that we're doing is just starting. We have been planning it for a few months and started to do the work now, and the plan is to publish the review on the 1st of November. So we're not finished yet, but I'm going to tell you what our thoughts are, where we are now, and what our thoughts are, how we have worked so far. So with a comprehensive review with this in focus, we hope to be able to present something interesting ahead of the Swedish VNR in 2021 or perhaps 2022. And we also hope to learn more about our possibilities to develop the review and give us an opportunity to learn more about how concepts relating to leaving no one behind can be operationalized in the Swedish context. So the aim is twofold, really: presenting the comprehensive review of the situation on the one hand, and on the other hand, identify sources, breakdowns, and indicators for future regular reviews. We are taking a very pragmatic approach to this exercise. All, or nearly all at least, statistics presented in the report will have been already published in one way or another. So therefore, the aim of the report is not to present something new. The added value is rather, as I would say, our SDG statistics in general terms in the Swedish context, is to provide an overarching overview of vulnerability and risks of being left behind in a wide range of areas presented together. So we use what we have and present it in a new framework. One of Statistics Sweden's core values, I have discussed this at length with colleagues, but it is probably core values that the translation is. Anyway, it's to trust each other's knowledge and competence. And I can tell you we're making good use of that core value in the work of the 2030 agenda. So I know people know more than they want to say, at least in official reports, about the subject matter area for which their job is to produce statistics. So I see it as my task to make them also trust that the knowledge that they possess is valuable for others to take part of. We have established a reference group for this exercise consisting of representatives of other government agencies and one ministry that produce statistics or have expertise knowledge in the topics of interest. The reference group has stressed that the explicit identification of gaps in data availability with regard to population groups at risk is of particular importance. So there are known gaps on, for example, people with disabilities and children and youths. And this exercise is seen as a possibility to send an important signal to the government of the need to make sure these gaps are filled. We will also, of course, identify possibilities that are there, but that we cannot carry through within the time frames that we're working in. So we will leave things for later. So the use of already published statistics is not the only way that we make use of what we already have. When we started thinking about how to actually get started, we picked up the draft chapter of the Leaving No One Behind principle that had been prepared for the second edition of the UNECE roadmap on SDG statistics, where Lenneke takes lead. And we started by looking at the disaggregation categories and the groups that were mentioned in the draft. And from that, we compiled a list of population groups at risk of being left behind and adapting it to national context and to what we had already learned from previous national reviews. And we also used the draft recommendations to sort of formulate the project, again, adapting it to national circumstance and, of course, to the limitations that this project faces. And after the compilation of the list of population groups at risk of being left behind, we added some thoughts on sources and potential analysis and sent all that out for consultation with other government agencies and civil society organizations. But we still felt that we missed a piece to move forward. And we needed something to kind of conceptually organize our analysis. And when CEDA, the government aid agency, in this consultation proposed to make use of their framework for multidimensional poverty analysis, we realized that that was probably what was missing. So after some further analysis of conceptual frameworks, we decided that CEDA's framework is good enough, simple enough to use as a conceptual tool. We will not frame our analysis around multidimensional poverty, nor will we construct an index, but we will use the framework as a tool to organize our analysis to ensure that we capture different dimensions of vulnerability. We will also make use of information from studies, published statistics and previous reviews, as well as the input we got in the consultation to identify population groups at risk to focus our analysis on, rather than set out to identify the groups using statistical analysis in this report. So by way of ending this, all in all, the end product will in no way be perfect, but we will be transparent, and we are confident that it will teach us a lot on how to move forward in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think it's quite an unusual approach. We don't have any questions coming through on the chat yet. I would personally like to ask you, who actually decided this? Was it the statistical office, or did you do it in consultation with ministries or with CEDA, or did you just decide as statistical office we're going to focus the statistical review on this subject?
We did. Actually, we were planning to have a chapter on this in the 2019 review, but we didn't really. It didn't really work. We didn't come all the way. So, and then we decided to do a special report on this that was supposed to be published in May, but more of a sort of conceptual report. But for different reasons, we started thinking about timings of the annual reviews and the other reports that we do. And in that sort of frame, we realized that it would be more interesting to do this report in more depth, and then sort of transform the annual statistical review into a review with this focus. So it was our idea, and our initiative, but in consultation with the Ministry of Environment, who's responsible, and with other agencies. So it was like all the others that we spoke to and discussed this issue with were really open to the idea and thought it was a really good idea. And I mean, one reason is that it wouldn't have been much different. A regular review wouldn't have been much different from the last one. So this would have been more interesting.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, because was this the only subject or dimension, if you like, that you considered, or were there other things like inequality in the population or another specific SDG, or was this the only sort of option for you?
Sorry, again,
focusing this on leave no one behind, this principle, was that the only idea, the only option, or did you have other ideas like focusing on one SDG or anything like that?
No, this was the option that we thought about and then decided to do. But within our assignment, we are supposed to make a proposal on how to run this follow-up, the statistical follow-up in the year run up to 2030, and in that sort of developing those ideas, we do have ideas of thematic reports in other ways. So we're hoping that we will finally, perhaps in 2021 or 2022, have a web platform that we can present the sort of running statistics and then make special reports annually instead of a regular review. And those might be thematic in different ways and more analysis.
Okay, we're getting some questions through on the chat now. The first one is from UNEC Stat 2, which should be somebody I know. Does anyone have any experience with working together with civil society to get data on possible groups left behind? And this coincides with a question from Nikolai Nikolov from Bulgaria, who asked, how can the role of citizens be increased in generating accurate, reliable, and timely statistical data? And I saw in your paper that you did include a sort of civil society consultation, or were planning to. So could you tell us something more about that?
Yes, we do work with civil society. We have lots of contacts with different organizations, primarily because they reach out to us to ask things and invite us to meetings and things like that. And we always try to accommodate that. And we really like having a sort of close cooperation with civil society organizations. They will get in touch and say, we'll be looking at this, could this be a possibility? And that's really good by way of developing our follow-up. And then we have this slightly more formal consultations, or in written consultations that we send out to many organizations through a sort of coordinating organization. And then we, at one or two occasions, we've organized meetings, so invited civil society organizations to come to meetings and discuss different things with us. So this would be the way of sort of connecting to this question about citizens. So that would be our way of trying to connect it. We don't have like open consultations on the websites or the public to, but we use civil society organizations and try to do it widely.
Okay, thank you very much. Cara Williams from Canada has a question. She really likes your approach and would like to know if you felt there was any political influence on it. More specifically, was there ever pressure on the NSO not to put in something?
Absolutely not.
No, okay. think you already may have answered that with my question. So it was your own idea, and you were just allowed to do what you wanted.
Yeah. Yes. Although, I mean, I don't know. Personally, I like to take risks, but I feel that I sort of within the organizations or within the organization, there's so many very cautious people, so it kind of balances, and all these checks sort of along the way. I think we do have a very the products that we finally put out are very sort of objective, but I would be the one that push for sort of saying more that we normally do, sort of in interpretation wise, but no, I would say no political pressure.
Okay, and the second part of the question is related. You said knowing this was not perfect, and did you have to put a disclaimer on something that is not statistically perfect, or could you just publish it as is?
As we're not publishing everything on the website, there might, I mean, we will use things that might not have been sort of really thoroughly statistically checked, but sort of we've looked through metadata and information, and we know the organization that has made these studies or analysis, so we might use that. But in the text, we will of course maybe not a disclaimer, but being really transparent about what this data is and how you can use it. So in a way disclaimers, but not in that structured way, really in the analytical text, I would say.
Okay, thanks very much. And I can see another question from Julian Solov, but I think Vivica has already answered it in your name. I could read out the question and the answer, see if you have anything to add. Julian says, thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting to analyze the multiple vulnerabilities to identify the furthest behind. My question is, will you also assess the problems these groups face, and then based on the findings, look for solutions? Second, if I understood correctly, you were using mixed methods when the data was not available. And Vivica answered, we asked the groups that have been involved in seminars and the government. Sometimes they have initiated research studies that have gone into some specific group. We've also seen that municipalities have made reports or inventories. For groups that are the focus of UN organizations, there are sometimes surveys that are targeted to vulnerable groups. I'm not sure if the question and the answer are linked.
I can add then.
Okay.
I can add. Yes, we will sort of identify the furthest behind, but also assess problems that these groups may face. So we're actually more sort of starting from the problems that we think that different population groups might face, and then sort of making this, seeing how we can visualize this or making it visible in statistics. And but I think when you talk about based on the findings, look for solutions, that's when you come into the more political area, which we might want to stay out of, actually. So solutions in terms of this is what the statistics shows. So if you do this, that statistics show that if you do this, this will happen. Those kinds of things, but we won't go into finding solutions in any other way, because that would be politics, I think. And mixing methods when data was not available, I'm not sure what you mean by that. We're going to use, I mean, what's out there, mixing methods, so you won't be able to look at an indicator and sort of
statistically compare that to another indicator, because there will be different data sources and things like that. And we're not collecting any of, we're not doing any, initiating any collections.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's quite clear. I have one last question which came through yesterday before the meeting, and that was from, I'm going to try and pronounce this correctly, Atarut Shodi Beksoda from UNICEF in Tajikistan. How do you cover the entire population and leave no one behind if the data is aggregated in higher levels, but the lower level data are not managed and maintained properly by different custodians? It's relevant to the work you've been doing, but
no, I need to hear the question again. There was some other sound.
How do you cover the entire population and leave no one behind if the data is aggregated in higher levels, but the lower level big data are not managed and maintained properly by different custodians? So,
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. I think what we have to do, or what we do, what has been a sort of a success or a way forward for us, is to sort of separate the work on disaggregation and sort of looking at vulnerable groups, separate the work that is done globally and the disaggregation that we try to do for the global indicators that are sent through to the custodian agencies, and what we do nationally. Those two are almost completely separate, actually. So, about the covering of the entire population, I don't know. Sometimes we need to cover the total population to find groups, but sometimes it's the way forward would be to try to cover the population that might be at risk, or rather to. I'm not sure whether that is a question, but I think the separation of the global level and the national level is kind of, has been for us at least, a way to think about this and to move forward.
Yeah, I think if Atarut has any further specific questions, maybe he could get in touch with you directly, or anybody else who has more information.
Absolutely.
Okay, Sarah, thanks very much. It's very interesting.
Thank you.
For me, I was very pleased to see that Chapter 7 or Chapter 9, I think it is now, is already being used. So thank you to Sarah and to Joe for showing us how an international approach versus a national approach focusing on one aspect. I'm now going to hand over to Mary Smith from Ireland, who's going to chair the second half of this meeting. So Mary, would you like to take over for me?
And just before I introduce our next speaker, we are now halfway through this first webinar. And speaking of COVID-19 situations and challenges, I would like to thank Tina and her team and Stella for turning around what was quite a full meeting agenda into a very professional webinar and organizing all the talks and presentations online. So thank you very much, and well done to you and your team for doing this in such a short time frame. So our next speaker is Alyssa Mosler Vidal, and Alyssa is with the International Organization for Migration, and Alyssa's presentation is on helping countries report on SDG indicators by migratory status.
Hello, Mary, thank you very much for the introduction, and Lineke also, and for the organizers. Very much also wish this were in person, but I guess that will happen next time. Just give me a second so I can share my presentation, please, and I'll put my video on straight after, otherwise I fear a crash. Great. So I'm going to speak to you today, funnily enough, about some work that IOM has begun doing with the support of Statistics Sweden, actually. And this is about disaggregation of development data focusing on the SDGs by migratory status. So there are a lot of references, both sort of direct and indirect, to migration in the 2030 Agenda. And the agenda's motto, to leave no one behind, is kind of a clear call for development to be inclusive, as we know, including for migrants. So while this inclusion of migration in the agenda is kind of a key opportunity to advance good migration governance, it also presents countries with a new series of data challenges. So I'm just going to pause. I saw a comment that I'm a little quiet. Is this any better? Okay, I'll continue and I'll see if any more comments come through. So one of the key data challenges that has arisen as a result of the inclusion of migration in the SDGs is this need to disaggregate a number of indicators by migratory status. So this was made explicit in Target 1718. And in many ways, this kind of disaggregation can actually be, in some ways, more challenging than doing this by other dimensions like sex and age and disability. This is partly because migrants are often part of hidden populations that are not easily counted. So this means that often the most vulnerable rarely appear in official statistics in the very first place. It's also because there is a general lack of quality migration data, and it means that often data on migrants are poorer than that on sort of other subgroups in the population also to begin with. So for many reasons that I'll also go into, this type of disaggregation is fairly difficult and new for a lot of stakeholders, including for a lot of NSOs across the world. And so in practice, what we also see is that disaggregation of SDG indicators that are reported, say on national reporting platforms or otherwise, disaggregation is low by migratory status in practice. So we know it's a challenge also because despite it being a few years into the agenda, we haven't seen a big increase in this type of disaggregation. So the reason why we sort of care about this at IOM and why we trying to now see some progress in this area is because what this means essentially is that as we approach the year 2030, we still do not know what the effects of the SDGs are for migrants and whether and to what extent they are being left behind. So there are three kind of key reasons why disaggregation of migratory status is important. There are many more, but these are kind of the three areas of policy making where it may be the most directly relevant. So the first is obviously for SDG programming. So if a number of SDG indicators were disaggregated, policymakers could then go beyond averages to examine development outcomes for migrants. And so this will help us know where interventions need to target and reach migrants more proactively so that they are, in effect, not being left behind. Secondly, more at the national or also regional level, just for generalized policy making, this kind of data would be really a bit of a game changer. So there's a real lack of data on migrant well-being and migrant integration, also in destination countries. And disaggregation could really help address this. It would help us understand more systematically what migrants' characteristics are in health, education, a lot of other areas, to directly support evidence-based policy making. So if we had this kind of information, we could then examine, say, whether and how any inequalities between migrants and non-migrants in these sectors may change over time, and then subsequently explore possible reasons behind this with research. The third point that we have here on the slide is actually about the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration, the GCM. This is composed of 23 objectives on migration policy areas that are really diverse. So everything from decent work to access to basic services and missing migrants and many, many more. Yet it has no official follow-up and review framework. So there's no kind of indicator framework for this, for example, as there is for the SDGs. And so the final point is that having disaggregated data across a number of sectors would actually give us a much stronger evidence base to help design diverse GCM interventions in the future. So I'm very briefly going to go through a few points, sort of practical steps that stakeholders, largely countries, can take to disaggregate SDG indicators by migratory status. But as a quick caveat, and I'll explain more about this at the very end, this is based on very, very new work by IOM. And what we're doing is compiling, developing, and sort of sharing on an ongoing basis different steps on disaggregating by migratory status. And so what I'm going to do is go through some preliminary sort of clusters of steps that we've identified. And then I'm happy to discuss any or more in more detail in the questions, because there's really a lot to unpack here in not very much time. So the first step is really to identify which SDG indicators should be disaggregated. So the Interagency Expert Group on Indicators, the IAEG, recommends that 24 are disaggregated. However, they can be more. This can be a higher number at the national level. And so policymakers, based on who they think may be most left behind or in what sectors migrants may be most left behind, can kind of choose, and indeed may have to, prioritize just a few indicators to disaggregate by, depending on these policy needs. So next, the exact disaggregation needs will need to be identified. And this is where disaggregation by migratory status as opposed to, say, sex, age, and disability is in many ways quite interesting and relatively underdeveloped, arguably, and I'll explain why in a second. So the standard variables to use to disaggregate by are country of birth. So this is to distinguish between foreign-born and native-born populations, or country of citizenship. And so that distinguishes between foreigners and citizens. However, it is possible to go beyond this. So there are other variables that, if one of the previous two are already there is data on that, that can be explored. And so this really depends on policy needs again, and it's sort of an idealized scenario, because very often, as we'll also speak about in a second, it's very hard to get this data to begin with. But I'll go through a few possible further variables which could really provide very rich data for policymakers, because they cover different subgroups of migrants. So, for example, first and second generation migrants, which can be done by disaggregating country of birth and or citizenship of individuals' parents, reason for migration, duration of stay in the destination country, also refugees and asylum seekers, or internal migrants. This is just an example of a few. But the one sort of key message to highlight here is that a lot of these categories lack internationally agreed definitions. And so we don't have harmonized concepts and definitions for all of these yet, which is an ongoing challenge, and I should add, a very active area of work as well. I should add also that countries may choose to disaggregate using sort of nationally defined variables. So, for example, legal categories of migrants that are relevant to that particular country. And in many ways, this is how data can most directly link back to a country's migration policies, because there's this sort of more direct feedback loop if nationally used categories are used to begin with. However, these categories are clearly not sort of internationally comparable, so they should really only be used in addition to other standard variables. So this is really where a lot of information is condensed into just a few bullet points. But depending on which indicators have been prioritized or chosen, there's a need to kind of examine the metadata to assess how to actually disaggregate these, if they have been monitored and reported on already. The need will be then to examine at what levels disaggregation may or may not exist already. And if the indicator hasn't been reported on, clearly this sort of means starting from scratch. So this could involve looking at what existing data can already be used, so what's collected in censuses and surveys and administrative records that could be used towards these indicators, and then exploring to what extent disaggregation exists already or could be possible in those different data sources. So as SDG indicators, we know can use, well, do use many different data sources. Specific issues for each of these need to be considered. One key point to highlight is that many use demographic and health surveys or other household surveys, where a very common challenge for disaggregation is limited sample size. So very large or relatively large sample sizes are needed in surveys for effective disaggregation, so it can be very expensive to use surveys that meet this challenge. There's a lot of conversation on the potential of sort of exploring administrative data sources for migrant disaggregated data, especially also in the context of the SDGs, or also census microdata, in particular as IPM's data, so integrated public use microdata series, can actually already disaggregate a lot of existing indicators by nativity status for a lot of countries. And so I think this was already touched on in the questions, but one key issue is clearly how to identify and address any potential risks to migrant individuals and groups in the data collection and dissemination process. So a key step here will also be to identify these and try and design appropriate kind of ethical or other data protection safeguards to address these. And again, this will depend on the data sources used. So beyond data collection, there are just a few quite interesting considerations that are particular to disaggregation that are important to keep in mind. And so just a few of these. One is specialized awareness raising. So before any kind of exercise for disaggregation begins, there may often be a need to kind of build awareness of in national statistical offices or with others involved of the importance of this in the first place. So, for example, this can be workshops linking statistical offices with migration policymakers, but this kind of exchange can be key to sort of get the necessary buy-in to begin with. Considering also that the migratory status disaggregation conversation, quite a mouthful, is a little younger in many ways, arguably, to disaggregation of sex and age, this kind of thing can be really given also that disaggregation is often lost in vertical reporting, it's also key to make sure that the same level of detail of the disaggregation is reflected in the reporting platforms at all levels. Finally, to have the highest possible impact, disaggregated data often needs quite different and quite specific and tailored communications and dissemination strategies. So this is because the idea is that these data do reach migration policymakers who may be in different ministries. And so different approaches may be needed to convey messages to each of these separately about different policy relevant conclusions from specific indicators and ultimately, hopefully promoting their use in policy making as much as possible. So I'm just going to end this quite brief presentation here, but I'll just conclude by saying a few things. So ultimately, measuring the links between migration and development is really challenging. It's a very complex conversation in academia and with policymakers. And disaggregation helps solve at least one small part of this, which is to measure development outcomes on migrants themselves, so at the individual level. But anyway, we know this is a challenge. There's a lot of work to be done, including defining a lot of these variables and concepts internationally and adopting harmonization. And so as efforts continue to kind of develop this sort of guidance, a lot of questions are open. And for that reason, there's also a need for all of those working in disaggregation efforts to partner together to discuss their experiences, good practices, lessons learned. This should also include working with countries very closely to keep defining needs and make sure that these respond to those needs and priorities at the country level. So in 2020, IOM's Global Migration Data Analysis Center, GIMDAT, which is based in Berlin, which is where I work, will actually begin to produce some user-friendly guidance just on this topic, on disaggregating SDG indicators by migratory status. And in this way, IOM hopes to make a little bit of progress in addressing some of these challenges. And as it's a new piece of work, we very much invite others to get in touch, discuss these topics further, whether it's to share examples or needs or challenges, because it's very much an open conversation, and we look forward to working with others on this. Thank you.
Alyssa, thank you very much for that very interesting presentation on helping countries to report on SDGs in relation to migratory status. And you outlined some of the challenges in terms of data disaggregation and when it's not available, how difficult it can be for policymakers, and also problems with definitions and so on of various terms internationally. Beyond data, you raised some very interesting points about awareness raising with national statistical offices and important issues around partnership between NSOs and key groups. So I would just like to ask a few questions that were sent before the webinar began. And one of those questions is, what guidance would you give for best practices in terms of localization of SDGs?
Thanks very much, Mary. So I think, it's an emerging area, and we're still in the process very much of collecting a number of examples and case studies. Off the top of my head, I can think of one exercise which happened in Armenia about 2 years ago to prioritize, not only prioritize SDG indicators that were most relevant to migrants, but also it was quite an in-depth exercise that actually then did a data mapping based on these indicators, based on national availability of different sources, and then tried to basically make this work and to use existing data, because there weren't very many additional resources available to report on those indicators and to disaggregate as much as possible. So it's a little bit of an isolated example, but I'm happy to also share whatever's available on it with members afterwards. But what was notable here was that actually, while people often think of disaggregation as an expensive issue as well, given also the sample size problem that I mentioned, we found actually that a lot of existing data was already disaggregated, but only at the subnational level and not at the national level. So I think these are sort of key wins, kind of low-hanging fruit almost, that countries often have, which is to make sure disaggregation, all of it that already exists, is reflected on national reporting platforms. Yeah, so that's sort of one localization example that I can share.
Okay, and just another question that came in relation to covering populations for Leave No One Behind. So people were interested in data at a high level, but if the lower level data is not managed and maintained properly by the different custodians, how would you advise countries or national statistical offices on dealing with that issue?
And Elisa, if you can also turn on your camera, it would be very nice to see you.
Oh, yes, sorry. Can you see me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that question. It's an interesting one, given that a lot of SDG reporting is only at the national level, but it really should be vertically inclusive. And honestly, in response to that, all I can say is what we're also hoping to highlight in the guidance that we're preparing is very much that topic. And if we're going to build inclusive data systems and to leave no one behind, that also means within NSOs and within government agencies being inclusive vertically. So I don't have a good example to give, but I think it's a very, very good question because it's a key issue, and it just requires collaboration within government agencies.
And Elisa, just there's two parts to this next question. Firstly, in terms of the collection and disaggregation of data, what challenges do you see facing a legal and constitutional challenges to collecting data at the disaggregated level in terms of the ethics and I suppose the fear of ethnic and people with specific backgrounds being targeted?
Thanks for the question. Well, I think, the variables that we discussed did not include, for example, ethnicity. The country of birth and citizenship, which are the two most standard or at least internationally agreed upon variables to disaggregate by, are collected anyway by a lot of censuses and other data collection instruments. And there should not be, if this data is anonymous, any sort of danger or harm to beneficiaries. But no, it's a key issue, and I think one sort of very important point is that if indeed national categories are used, so I discussed the possibility of using, say, particular legal definitions that are used in country or categories to disaggregate by. If that's the path that the countries go down, it's even more important to ensure there are firewalls between data collection and, say, law enforcement, for example. Similarly, I think where we talk about operational data being used in lieu of official statistics for any reason, say, well, in a crisis, for example, as we're seeing now quite often, where operational data is used, whatever institution, organization, whether it's the smallest NGO or UN agency, appropriate data protection guidelines need to be followed there as well. And larger institutions or many, already have their own tailored guidance, but this needs to be followed even in a crisis situation where, for example, operational data becomes more public and more important. But I think the anonymization point is the most important.
And just secondly to that question, will you be in a position to provide advice and support to countries in terms of security and anonymization of the data to prevent misuse?
Thanks. I'd like to say that we would be able to, but I'm not quite sure. So over the next 6 or 8 months or so, we'll be working on this guidance. We're hoping to sort of kickstart a fairly open consultation process on this, and we expect this very question to be a key topic. So we'll be defining, to be honest, in the next few months what we end up being able to in our guidance. But I would hope that that is a key topic. And at the very least, I hope that we advise on key data sources that are used for SDG indicators to be able to do that on some level.
Elisa, we look forward to the guidance in 2020 and reading the report. And just finally, how would you advise raising awareness among the target population itself in terms of the SDGs? So if the target population isn't aware of the SDGs and the benefits of them, how do you propose tackling that issue?
Well, I think for migrants in particular, there are plenty of tools and guidance on there on being inclusive for migrants. So say translating languages, for example, things that already exist at the national level for non-migrants, just to make sure that that these reach migrants, and also to also go back to the data protection point, also to perhaps ensure that they are aware that any SDG data collection is also intended to help them and will have, say, appropriate safeguards or firewalls to help them want to take part as well.
you very much, Elisa, and a very interesting presentation, and we look forward to that guidance in 2020. So finally, to our fourth and final speaker, Anthony O'Grady, and Anthony is with the Department of Communications, Climate Action and the Environment, and Anthony's presentation is on SDG policy in Ireland.
Good afternoon, folks. Can you hear me there?
Yes, very clear, Anthony.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen now. Is that working okay?
Perfect, Anthony.
That's great. So good afternoon, folks, and thanks very much for asking me to speak here. It's an incredible job you guys have done, given the current crisis, to put on a webinar of this standard, and I'd just like to thank everyone for being here and listening. This is just a outline of what the presentation is going to contain. The first part, what are the Sustainable Development Goals, I probably don't need to go into, but it's always nice to start from a base. And then I'm going to go through the government policy, what we've been doing in Ireland with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm going to address leaving no one behind in practice, how it actually looks from a policy perspective. Then I'm going to talk about stakeholder engagement and what we're doing in Ireland to try and get everyone in the room who has an interest in sustainable development. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on our National SDG Champions Programme, which was a programme we designed to raise awareness for the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, I'll conclude with what we plan on doing in 2020, although obviously that has probably changed a little bit given the current COVID-19 crisis. So moving on, the Sustainable Development Goals obviously were agreed in September 2015. 193 UN member states managed to come to an agreement on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Our former UN ambassador, David Donoghue, was one of the key men in negotiating the agenda, and it's an incredible piece of work. It's an incredible framework to create a better world. Obviously, just outlining here, it has 169 targets, and the centerpiece of the 2030 Agenda is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which have different economic, social, and environmental dimensions. So moving on to what the government policy is here in Ireland with regards to achieving the SDGs, we wrote our first National Implementation Plan in 2018, and it was published in April 2018. In it, our vision was for Ireland to fully implement the Sustainable Development Goals at home, while still contributing to the achievement internationally through our Foreign Affairs Department. I guess our aim within Ireland was how to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and where we were in 2018 when we first published this document. There were a number of different priorities within the document, awareness raising being one, as the awareness level within Ireland was very low in 2018. The plan, as outlined here, it indicated a whole of government approach to implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. One of the key parts of the National Implementation Plan was that we set out a policy map in the document. And in the policy map, we linked every target in the Sustainable Development Goals to a lead department, and it contained a table of actions which we envisage it would be completed within the lifetime of the plan, and currently we're on track to achieve that. In conjunction with writing our first National Implementation Plan in 2018, we also presented our first voluntary national review to the United Nations in 2018. Now the voluntary national review that we presented in 2018 was like a base report of where we were at the time. The National Implementation Plan was the forward focus, if you'd like, and the voluntary national review was the base of where we were at that time. So, just moving on. So what we've done with regards to leaving no one behind and stakeholder engagement, we established a Sustainable Development Goals Stakeholder Forum in June of 2018. Now, one of the goals of the forum is to get everyone in the room, as I'm saying there, and really it's about having members of society, having academia, having business, having government all in the one room, with a focus on the Sustainable Development Goals and achieving the goals. Like I've put there, it's a unique opportunity really, because it's very rare that we have everyone in the room discussing things out of their silos. There's a number of different aspects to this stakeholder forum and the engagement that we're participating in here in Ireland. We have a corporate social responsibility forum, which is run by our Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation. Myself and my colleague Joe sit on that forum as well, so that we're in constant contact with business and their future plans for sustainable development and how it ties into government policy. We have a very good working relationship with civil society here in Ireland, and we have a very close working relationship with Coalition 2030, who are a civil society organisation set up to try and help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So leaving no one behind, what does that mean in practice? As I've mentioned previously, our approach in Ireland is to have a whole of government approach. The idea is that we would line up each SDG with each lead department, and with regards to leaving no one behind, I'm just highlighting a couple of the national policies with regards to the same. In the Department of Social Protection, we have the National Action Plan for Social Inclusion. In the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, we have the Rebuilding Ireland Action Plan for Housing and Homelessness. A couple of policies that I haven't listed here but are very relevant to leaving no one behind is the National Migration Plan and the National Strategy for Women and Girls. Internationally, we also have the Department of Foreign Affairs new international strategy, A Better World. In addition to like traditional stakeholder engagement, as I've mentioned previously, Ireland has also developed an SDG online platform in collaboration with the Central Statistics Office, OSI, and Esri Ireland. The Department of Communications has actually collaborated on a SDG platform, and the GeoHive, which is the address is listed there. It's currently being used to collect, collate, and report on all publicly available SDG data. We've just recently issued 2 reports, one on SDG 1 and one on SDG 2, which outlines the progress currently made from a statistical level on the SDGs. Moving on now to the Sustainable Development Goals Champions Programme. In 2018, when we wrote our national implementation plan, one of the key things that we realized was that national awareness of the SDGs was lacking. So what we came up with was a champions program to try and both raise awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals and also to try and progress implementation at a ground level. These are the 12 champions that we chose. You can see them listed there on post. Bordish Gawara, who are Ireland's Seafood Development Agency, Carlow County Council, which is a regional county council local development, Eco UNESCO, which is a UN organisation, the Gaelic Athletic Association, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, Men's Sheds, Musgraves, which is a collection of shopping markets, the National Women's Council of Ireland, Smart Farming, which is a project with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Irish Farmers Association, the Union of Students of Ireland, and Vodafone. And as you can see by those champions, they're a very diverse group. And the idea with that champions program is that we're trying to leave no one behind. So we're trying to reach everyone. Now these organizations all had massive outreach within Ireland, and that was one of the reasons that they were chosen for the program for this year. So moving on to the last point, just what are we going to do currently for SDGs in 2020? Well, our current national implementation plan runs out at the end of 2020. So the plan from the start of this year was to publish a new national implementation plan at the end of Q4. Given the current COVID situation, that may change as as stakeholder engagement is quite difficult at this time. We also plan on releasing our first progress report on the Sustainable Development Goals, which we're going to use the data collected by the GeoHive and the Central Statistics Office to form the basis of. We do plan on having another iteration of the SDG Champions program, and it will focus more on implementation than awareness for the following year, but we're not really sure how that's going to pan out this year, as I think that the current champions would feel that their year has been somewhat cut short in regard of awareness raising due to the current COVID crisis. One of the other key things this year, I guess, is that September obviously marks the 5th anniversary of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, at the start of the year, we had been exploring ideas for a SDG week within Ireland, and we were going to do some collaborative events with civil society organisations and with other government departments. One of the things we've been looking at the moment is how that might take place digitally, given the current crisis. But hopefully by September, things will have lifted a bit and restrictions will be less, and we'll be able to continue on spreading the good word of the Sustainable Development Goals and trying to achieve them by the ambitious target of 2030. So thanks for your time, and any questions now?
Thank you very much, Anthony. That's a very interesting presentation on the SDGs from a policy perspective in terms of leaving no one behind. And just in terms of some of the questions that were fielded beforehand, what would you advise in terms of the most effective measure to implement the goal of leaving no one behind?
The effective measure, yeah, that's a difficult question. I think leaving no one behind, while it's not a defined goal as such, it's definitely a central pledge to the 2030 agenda, and the Sustainable Development Goals, obviously. But it's quite a complex idea, and the practical implementation of how leaving no one behind is often glossed over, sort of. Like reaching the furthest behind and leaving no one behind, while they're key targets of Ireland's policy on achieving the SDGs, and as I said previously, this is a whole of government approach. We really need to identify the policy choices most effective. This might not always be specific to target groups, but it'll need a combination of policies designed to address a number of different issues. And while we've made significant efforts to reach out to the furthest behind, to include them in policy discussions and have them included in our stakeholder forum, I guess like the idea is that we really need to bring all our actors together in to achieve the SDGs, and the achievement of the SDGs really needs to be a whole of society approach. It can't just be a whole of government approach. And one of the key things, I guess, is the collaboration we have, Mary, with the Central Statistics Office and ourselves, and the identification of the groups that are behind, and the identification of how far they're behind, and trying to bring them all back together. So I'm not sure if that answers in total, but
yes, it's very interesting, the collaborative approach. And just a question from Cara Williams. She is just wondering, in terms of the pre-COVID-19 activities, what were some of the activities you were planning during this week, and would any of these activities be targeting the vulnerable groups?
Well, some of the ideas that we've had, we were working with Coalition 2030 on a number of different ideas. One of them was an all-inclusive sort of concert events idea. It hadn't had a framework put on it, but the idea was to bring everyone in the room to celebrate the Sustainable Development Goals. But some of the key aspects that we had also been looking at was having events in colleges in Ireland. There was a proposed event to have a Sustainable Development Goals week in the University of Limerick, and we've been talking to the United Nations Irish Youth Delegate, Jack O'Connor, and he was actually planning to run the week in Limerick, and one of the key things was to reach out to vulnerable groups, so to reach out to like travellers, to reach out to migrants, to reach out, to try and get everyone in the room to discuss the Sustainable Development Goals and how they affect everyone's day-to-day. Because, sorry, I'll just turn on the camera. There you go. Yep.
Anthony, I think we've lost your voice when the camera came on.
Sorry, apologies there. Did that crash?
Yeah, that's fine now, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we had a number of different ideas with regards to what we were going to do with the SDG week, and really, I mean, I guess we had only been in the initial phase, but two of the things that we had, like I said, that we're discussing, one was an SDG week in the University of Limerick, and the other one was a collaboration with the Coalition 2030 to try and reach those groups who were left behind, and to see how we could identify how far they're behind, how they identify themselves within the SDG framework, and what we can do to help them move forward.
And Anthony, we have a question from Gulnara. How was the start of the SDG Ambassadors program initiated, and how is the selection process, and what do the ambassadors do?
Okay, well, so what we did is we asked for expressions of interest last January with regards to becoming an SDG champion, and we expected to have 10 to 12 applications, but we received 76 applications, which sort of shocked us at the time, because we weren't really sure of the national awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals. With regards to the selection process, what we did was, because it was the first year and what we were focusing on was national awareness, we tried to pick organisations with large outreach within Ireland. We also tried to reach everyone, to leave no one behind. So while there is some smaller organisations involved in the Champions Programme, they were picked because of their outreach is to smaller sectors where we felt like there wasn't enough awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals. With regards to what the champions do, we've worked with the champions from the start since September to try and raise national awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals. But also, one of the key things for us within the department is partnership for the goals, which is obviously SDG 17. And what we've been trying to do is make sure that the champions work together in collaboration to try and raise the awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I think that's...
And if any organisation or civil society is interested in getting involved with the Stakeholder Engagement Forum, how do you advertise that, or how do they know about the work you're doing?
Well, so the Stakeholder Forum is, it's an open invite, and what I would say is that we don't advertise the forum, but what we do have is on our the department's website, we have a web page dedicated to Sustainable Development Goals. Our outreach and invitation is to everyone. So what we ask is that through the civil society organisations, through business organisations, we advertise through those organisations. So we want everyone in the room. Now there are some areas, like leaving no one behind, there are some certain demographic groups that are difficult to reach, that we have directly reached out to try and have them in the room, so that the Stakeholder Forum is a full representation of the entirety of Irish society.
And finally, Anthony, Vivica poses a question of looking at children in terms of a group of people in Leave No One Behind.
Yeah.
So have you been targeting any groups working with children or vulnerable children?
Well, I mean, we work closely with the Department of Children and Youth Affairs with regards to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, we have in Ireland a department directly charged with the Children and Youth Affairs. So while my own work and our work in the Department of Communications and Climate Action is more around the central coordination of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, the Department of Youth and Children Affairs does deal with it. I can see the question there. That's quite a long one. Yeah, I mean, we are looking at children as a group. One of the areas is to have youth involved and to have a proper platform for youth engagement within the Sustainable Development Goals, not just to sort of pass off the youth. We have looked at the possibility of having a youth Sustainable Development Goals forum, and we're currently exploring the idea with our climate action section, because we're thinking of having a combination SDG youth forum, which basically would give youth the opportunity to talk about the SDGs in their own view and how they see things going forward. Sorry, I'm just being interrupted by a little child here. Speaking of youth. So I mean, youth is definitely a sector we are looking for, and definitely we're trying to make sure that their voice is heard.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you for answering those complex questions.
Great.
Just to summarize the session today, and again, thank you to all the speakers for very interesting presentations. And to summarize very briefly, Sarah spoke of the work they're doing in Statistics Sweden with the statistical review of Leave No One Behind. And it was very interesting to see how Sarah incorporated the roadmap into the work of Statistics Sweden with a dedicated report and a very interesting focus on the population themselves rather than the goals. So I think that was very interesting to see how the population is targeted and then mapped to the goals rather than the other way around. And then Sweden's national indicator list was very interesting to emphasize that, because obviously the issues will be different for every country. Joanne spoke on the Inclusive Data Charter and the importance of data disaggregation in terms of policy making, and her very interesting comment that we cannot provide services, schools or hospitals, if we don't know the population exists. And then it was very interesting to see the work they're doing on global coordination and collaboration with data disaggregation and supporting governments, civil society and international organizations. And Joanne emphasized the importance of partnership and sharing skills and knowledge and building awareness. Alyssa spoke on helping countries in terms of the SDGs for migratory level and the challenges that people face in terms of data disaggregation and various sources and types of sources and the problems and issues with various sources. And Alyssa also emphasized the collaboration and the need for harmonized definitions at an international level and difficulties around policy making without data at this disaggregated. Beyond data, Alyssa emphasized awareness raising among national statistical offices and the importance of partnership again and collaboration between NSOs and various key groups in relation to the target population. And then communications was emphasized in SDG reporting. Then finally, Anthony spoke on the SDG policy implementation in Ireland and the importance of engaging with the various groups and bringing them all together so that they can share their experience and achieve the goals in a collaborative sense, and the SDG champions and the importance of a whole of government approach in the national implementation plan and leaving no one behind. So I suppose all the presentations in terms of leaving no one behind emphasize the importance of data disaggregation, identifying the population and the needs of the target population. The very strong common themes are the multi-stakeholders, the collaboration between organizations, ministries and experts, and then a targeted focus on the population at risk, and then looking at mapping that to the SDGs. So everyone emphasized the partnership model and sharing skills and support, and how every organization at global and national level can support each other in terms of sharing the skills and knowledge and sharing expertise around building awareness and communication, and also sharing their experience. So thank you very much. And Tina, I will hand over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Lineker and Mary, for moderating this very interesting session. There was one question which came after Elisa's presentation, but I thought as we have a little bit time, maybe we could still ask this, and it's in a way for all presenters. That the question is how to encourage governments to measure some SDG indicators that are very sensitive, and how to promote data collection for these. So before concluding, if Joanne, Sarah, Elisa, and Anthony, if you have any ideas on this, for example, if we start with Joanne.
Hello. So how to encourage governments to measure? Well, I think we're really lucky in the UK, in the ONS, in that we are an independent statistical organisation, and so it's our decision, really. Yeah, and I think that's really crucial for this, is you need that independence, that distance from government, because one of the phrases we often use, if government were measuring it themselves, it's like marking their own homework. So by being that little bit distant, I think that's how you do it.
Sarah, any ideas on that?
Yes, are also fortunate in that way that we have the independence of deciding deciding on these things, and government agencies have generally are very independent in our national setup. So this is perhaps not so much of an issue for us, but I would say that when we're talking about collaboration and cooperation, I think is also key here in a way, because I mean, if there are problems, that statistical organizations probably cannot do this on their own. So it has to be a collaboration between civil society organizations and other groups that could sort of advocate for this, and perhaps what the statistical agency could do is show how to measure this, or give examples of how this could be possible. I think that could be the NSO response, perhaps, that it can be done, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, and Elisa?
Yes, thanks very much for the question. So I think there are two main points I would add. First is that the SDGs are kind of global level, I mean, they're global goals, right? So I think one thing to highlight also in advocacy efforts where these kind of issues come up is that the goals and ergo the indicators aren't intended to catch governments out or to name and shame or rank countries at all, but rather, sort of emphasize the global nature of the indicators. Could sometimes help in advocacy efforts. And my second point was what Sarah said, also on implementation. I think assistance here is also the key, whether it's capacity building efforts or direct assistance, technical assistance, because often that's also sort of beyond some reticence to be doing some.
Yes, thank you. And Anthony, do you have also something to add on this?
Yeah, I guess from our perspective in Ireland, one of the key things, I suppose, when we presented our voluntary national review at the UN, one of the reasons we were applauded for our voluntary national review was that it didn't just focus on the positives. It did identify some of the areas where we weren't doing as well, and climate action was one of the ones in which we were struggling. And obviously we released our climate action plan last year, so you could say as a direct result of having it identified within the voluntary national review, we ended up with a comprehensive plan for climate action. And again, one of the other areas where we were struggling, and a sensitive subject, especially politically, was with regards to homelessness in Ireland, and obviously the continued effort to fight homelessness in Ireland, and building on the national Rebuilding Ireland action plan for housing and homelessness. So I think it's about buy-in. If governments buy into the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals and the framework within which they sit, I think that they will organically address those SDG indicators that are sensitive and are, they're difficult. But I think it's all about buy-in and collaboration. If the focus is on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which it clearly has been in Ireland since the agreement of the goals, I think that those will automatically happen. With it won't always be a good story, but it'll be an accurate one.
Thank you. Lineke, would you like to say something to conclude?
Yes, I would reiterate Mary's thanks to you and Stella for organizing all this, and all the emails that came through from Stella prompting us to do things on time and get things ready on time. I would also like to thank Mary for being my co-chair, because when she agreed to be the co-chair, she thought this would involve a trip to Budapest, a nice week in Budapest, and now she's stuck at home behind a laptop. She probably would have been in Budapest anyway, but thanks very much, Mary, for helping me organize the session. Thank you. We have 106 participants maximum online at once, so thanks to everybody who's still here. I can see 96 people still online. And apart from that, we're going to write a summary, and that will be available via the UNEC wiki page. The chats have been saved. The meeting has been recorded, I presume, Tina. So everything is available for reference. If you have any questions, get in touch with me or Mary or Tina or Stella. And keep safe, everybody. Stay healthy. I hope to see you sometime in the future, face to face.
So yes, I would like also to thank everyone. Thank all the presenters, very good presentations, very good moderators that we had. I should say that all participants were very disciplined about muting their microphones, and we had almost practically no noise or anything in the background. So from technical viewpoint, it seemed to me that it went very well. So thank you very much, everyone, for participating, and we will continue tomorrow. There will be another webinar at the same time, starting at 3 o'clock Central European Summer Time. And this will be then on the topic of use of SDG data and going beyond indicators. So I'm hoping that it will be as interesting as it was today. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and the life will get back to normal at some stage. Thank you.